Alright, with the next Unearth Arcana probably just right around the corner, I'm expecting that to drop this week probably, I figured it was a good time to share my thoughts on Playtest Package 6 and also where I kind of see the playtest process being right now and why I think that Wizards are probably messing it up. So without further ado, let's just take a look at my overall thoughts on Playtest Package 6. First off, there's the good stuff. Obviously, the Rogue, everybody loves the new Cunning Strike feature where you can trade away sneak attack dice to commit some extra effects, poison people, whatever. And I think it's a really great feature. It's something that makes a lot of sense, probably something that should have been there all along, but it's a nice addition and it really elevates the Rogue and gives the Rogue more options in combat, which is something it sorely needed. Now, it's not a perfect feature by any means. There's plenty of things you can do to tweak it and make it better, but it is really a great first step and sort of the creativity you want to see from these playtest packages, something that really takes the game further. Also in the good bracket for me is of course the weapon masteries, although I still don't believe they are as great as people make them out to be, and I am also worried about whether or not they're gonna make the game more cumbersome, more slow, which they might. That sort of depends on how you use them, and some of them are passive and so on, and again there are some tweaking that needs to be done, but they are something that could possibly make the game even better. And then there's something like the Paladin's smiting feature, which I've seen get a lot of critique, but which I actually think is an improvement, where it's much more noticeable the effects the Paladin can make on a smite, and something that the Paladin is probably going to do a lot more than just dealing damage. They're gonna smite and have some effect, and it's also fine that they can only do it once per turn. Now, I wouldn't go ahead and make it a bonus action necessarily, because I think that sort of shoehorns the Paladin into certain builds and playstyles, which is something that I never really like. So I think the Wizards of the Coast could tweak that a bit, but making it once per turn, making it something that has different effects, that's something that I can get behind and I think is a good step forward. Moving on to the bad here, I think that you could go in and critique some of the classes, what's happening with the Ranger, what's happening with this class and that class, but what I think is most bad for me is the way that they're sort of moving backwards on some of the changes that they've made previously, because they sort of probably, as it sounds like, don't have time to make them work. As a Ranger in general, the whole second Ranger we got was not very flavorful, but a lot more powerful. Now they're reining it back and reintroducing some of the flavorful features that don't really work. So then just not hitting it quite right, and they're reverting some of the changes that we actually wanted to see. The same goes for the Druid, of course, with Wild Shape being still controversial, and the Wild Shape attempt they made was so botched that now they got a lot of negative feedback. They're just rolling it back and doing it. Yeah, you can use monster stat blocks again. And that's not the solution I think that most of us were after. That's not the critique we had. The critique we had was that the stat blocks they gave us for the Wild Shape were usually bland. Of course, there's the Monk. It's been hugely critiqued already. I won't be the first or the last to tell you how bad the new Monk is and how poor a job Wizards have done of making the Monk viable. From balance-wise, reducing, nerfing, Stunning Strike was probably necessary, but they didn't give anything to compensate for that. Not anything that matters really. A minor damage boost, stuff like that. It's not a great Monk. Still, it's not a Monk that you would probably want to play. Another thing that I think is really, really disappointing, or at least for me disturbing, is the way that they're using spell-like features now, where really a lot of stuff has become spells. It's everything from Hunter's Mark, of course, which was always a spell, but it's still a spell, to other features where they're, instead of just giving the classes features that they can use, whether that's Hex, Hunter's Mark, or Smite, they now have spells that they have to use. And the reason why you would use a spell is, of course, that the spell has some vocabulary, it has some meaning already in the game that you can draw upon. So if you want to use concentration, if you want to have the spell be available to more than one class, if you want to do these things, it may be a good idea to make it a spell so you don't have to sort of redefine it every time you use it, or redefine stuff like concentration every time. But for spells that don't require concentration, or that is really only viable for one class, or should only be used for one class, like the Wizard's Scribe Scroll spell they had there for a moment, or the Paladin's Smite spells, why not just have them be features? And for me, Hunter's Mark shouldn't require concentration. It probably shouldn't just be damage. It should do something else. And I don't need that to be a spell. I think it should be a feature. And I think it's a bit worrying that they're kind of going in the other direction, where they're making more things into spells. And I think it's a really, really bad design choice. Because it also makes it so that you have to flip through more pages every time you want to do stuff. And yeah, I don't think it makes for a great gameplay experience. And in the same vein, I'm also seeing a lot of you can use this feature once, but then you can burn a spell slot to use it again, or you can use it twice and you get one use back on a short rest and the rest on long rest. There's all these kinds of different times you get stuff back, a number of times you can use stuff, and then you can use spell slots to fuel your class feature uses, which is just, to me, so unnecessary and so overcomplicated. It was like they had this idea with proficiency bonus where you can use this proficiency bonus times per day, and once they had to go away from that, well, they just decided to upend the bucket and just do all kinds of different number of uses, ability modifier, proficiency modifier, just 2 times, just 3 times, back on a short rest, back on a long rest. And we need more uniformity on these things, I think, and it needs to be less complicated, because trying to remember, okay, I can use this feature 3 times a day, and other feature that's 2 times a day, because that's tied to my class levels or whatever, and this is tied to my charisma. But then if I burn a spell slot, I can get 1 use back, but I can only do that once per day. You can see how this quickly becomes so cumbersome for the character and the player to handle and to keep track of. And it really, really, for me, needs to be easier, and that they're taking it in a direction where they're actually making the game more complicated. All right, so with my sort of overall views on the state of the playtest here and what we got in Playtest Package 6 out of the way, where does this leave us with the process? If you've been online reading through the Reddits or YouTube channel comments and stuff like that, you've probably seen a general sentiment that the playtest process feels a bit rushed and is not necessarily in a great place. And that's something I really, really agree with. I think that Wizards are definitely rushing the release of the 2024 Player's Handbook and whatever, because they want to do some anniversary 50 years reveal stuff. Another thing there's also some grumbling about, and which I still agree with, is the fact that they're going to stay so close to 5e, and they're really trying to make it backwards compatible, also in terms of sourcebook, not just adventures. They want to really make it so that you don't have to buy, or you can still use your old books. And that's great for us. We're a 5e publisher. We have published a lot of 5e books. There's links to those below. And we also have a Kickstarter coming up that'll introduce merchants, marketplaces, cool new enchanting, crafting rules, all kinds of awesome stuff for your 5e game, and something that really fills out the rules where they are lacking. And it's going to work great for 5e. It would also work for a very different set of rules, because at its core it's just concepts and ideas. But of course it's even better for us that they're not really going to change the rules, because that just means that our books are 100% as viable now as they were before, including Wanderer's Guide to Enchanted Emporiums coming to Kickstarter soon. There's a link down below. And that aside, I still want them to change the rules more than they're doing. I want them to really shake the bag and fix some of the core issues of 5e. And I'm afraid that they're not going to do that, or it seems like they're not going to do that. Because I think that for us fans, players, DMs, the sentiment here is that we don't really care that much about having to replace our 10-year-old books or even our 5-year-old books, as much as we just want the game to be as good as possible and as fun as possible, and also maybe to feel a bit fresh and new. So the question becomes, why don't they? Why don't they overhaul the game? Why don't they give it a year or more? And unfortunately, the answer that I come back to is profit. And it makes sense. Every company has to make a profit. We have to make a profit when we make books, and Wizards of the Coast is no different. They have shareholders and CEOs and everything. They have quarterly revenue plans and all kinds of weights upon them. But it's really clear, I think, how in this particular case, they're really letting profit trump actually making the game better. And it's a huge detriment. And I think it's a case of wanting to eat your cake and have it too. I think it's the English or American expression, where they really want to keep selling 5e books right up until the point that the new Player's Handbook comes out. And they know if they had announced, well, we have 6th edition coming out in a year and a half or 2 years, then sales of 5e content would probably dry up quite a bit. So they didn't want to announce that. And again, it makes sense. But it's also a very short-term kind of way of thinking. And I think it might work in the short term. I think they're probably selling more 5e books now than they would have if they had announced the 6th edition. So that's probably correct. But I would be worried that when the 2024 Player's Handbook comes out, if it's rushed because we had to get it done in this amount of time to hit this announcement for the anniversary, and we had to do it for the revenue reports for 2024, blah, 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 blah. So they're rushing the process. The product's not going to be as good. And when it then comes out and people are not that excited about it, you already see a lot of people saying, why would I buy this? It's like minor rules revisions that's already been homebrewed by a lot of the community and often in even better ways. So I don't really need to go out and spend money on a new Player's Handbook that has barely any changes to how the game functions, which is a sentiment that I kind of share. Of course, I'm a super nerd, so I'd probably buy it anyway, but it's not something that I'm excited about in the same way I would be excited about a brand new edition or at least a 5.5. So I think it's going to hit them maybe. I think it's going to sort of make interest in the game dwindle a bit in the long term, 2024, 2025. And I think it's going to leave a vacuum for other games to step into. Tales of the Valiant was the one from Corporate Press. Critical Role's new system, Matt Colville's new system, a lot of these other, Pathfinder 2 of course, or whatever Pathfinder becomes. There's a lot of alternatives out there, and I think they may see an increase, which is always great to have diversity in games, but for me it's just like, you want to play the main edition. I think a lot of people feel that way, that if you play the main edition, a lot of other people are going to play it. So it would have, for me, been better if they just done it the right way. But I think it really is a case of profit over the game. And it's sad to see. Those are my thoughts on Playtest Package 6 and, of course, what's probably coming in the future and where I think this playtest is going. I'm excited to see if there will be a new playtest dropping this week, maybe next week. And I will, of course, try to cover that in some videos if I can, now that I'm not on vacation as it drops. But yeah, that's the video. If you liked it, you can click on the subscribe button down below. You can check out our new Kickstarter, Wonders Guide to Enchanted Emporiums, which is going live soon, as well as the books we're already selling. All of those are in the description down below. And beyond that, there's not a whole lot left to say, except thank you so much for watching, and I hope that I'll see you in the next video.